This is Luke from Couch Row Brewing. With the War of the Spark Chronicles about to hit Magic Arena, the event during the second week will be a week-long Pauper Challenge. It's been over 2 months since Pauper's been on MTG Arena. The event entries will be free, and I'm super excited to get a chance to get back into the meta. This is also our first crack at the meta since War of the Spark released. So, I'm really excited to get going, test a lot of the new cards, and see where the format leads. That being said, a lot of people might not have played in the last event for Arena Pauper, and I'm doing this video to give my take on the meta for the last Pauper Arena event. I'm gonna break this down in Tier 1 decks and a few honorable mentions. Let's start with the best aggro deck in the format, Mono White. Mono White aggro seeks to take a lot of initiative, playing a bunch of low-costed flyers to be able to pound in and with early damage and then take over the game. It does so by playing cards like Healer's Hawk and Rustwing Falcons in the one spot. Silver Beak Griffins, which is ironically a Planeswalker deck exclusive card, which is just 2 mana for a 2/2 flyer. Cheap instants and sorceries like Take Heart and Take Vengeance to be able to buff your creatures to win combat and kill opponent's creatures after they've already attacked in for damage. Squire's Devotion to give your non-lifelinkers lifelink, and to get an extra body out of the deal. And Luminous Bonds to be able to lock down a big threat so they can stay after opponent tries to stabilize so they can finish off the game. The Mono White deck is very consistent and was very heavily played in the last 2 metas. I like it a lot versus a lot of decks. The flying evasion is really important. It's one of those decks that it has an obvious answer, a very easy to attack, but it's also really consistent at what it does. There's a lot of new cards that are now legal because of War of the Spark that will maybe change up some of the higher ends of this deck, but the core of it should remain the same. Let's move on to the second deck. Next, we're going to cover my favorite deck, the Orzhov mid-range deck that uses a lot of recursive creatures you could sacrifice for value to be able to grind your opponent out of resources and then win the game. The deck uses cards like Hunted Witness and Imperious Oligarch to be able to block, trade, chip in early, sacrifice to cards like Final Payment, and get back after you've ran your opponent down on cards and removal, buy them all back with a Dead Revels to just as a massive value agent to try to get your opponents out of the game. Impassioned Orator helps keep your life total up, and against most decks, that's good enough. Legion Conquistador is a great card value engine in white, and ironically, having a bunch of 2/2s on the ground is super big in a lot of matches. Has cheap, efficient removal, like the Final Payment, and the Fungal Infections, to be able to keep your opponent's creatures small enough to where they trade, or be able to 2-for-1 your opponent for the low cost of 1 mana. And sitting at the top end, we have a card, Ill-Gotten Inheritance. This card really helped to change up the meta. The black-white and the black-red lists that are mid-range tend to run this towards the top of their curve. It's almost unanswerable, and if you do end up flooding out, being able to sacrifice ill-gotten inheritance to deal 4 damage to an opponent in response to them gaining life to get them out of range is a great way to close out a game. Can get a little dicey in the mirror. Finally, the third deck I want to talk about today, through the magic of editing, a week later after I recorded the other two, noticed a shave. Looks nice. Apparently, persistent petitioners did get banned, and I was gleefully unaware of that. It was very quietly just removed from the format, and it was like a footnote in the thing. So instead of talking about a card that, or a deck that consists of just islands and as many persistent petitioners you want to cram into a deck, being ironically the boogeyman of the format, I'm going to talk about the deck that it pretty much pushed out, which is super creature-like control. If you want to live the good old days where you don't have to worry about planeswalkers and other things mucking and things like creatures mucking up your otherwise clean battlefield, have I got a deck for you. This deck was super fun around Christmas. The mirrors were great. Everybody loved it. Okay, I loved it a lot. I thought it was amazing. Let's cover Dimir control. You're using pretty much interaction all the way up the curve. We got dead weights and moment of cravings to keep the small creatures clear early. We got divinations to draw you more gas. Devious cover-ups to be able to counter the bigger stuff, or if you kind of want to shuffle some of your better cards back into your library. Mephisic Vapors to be able to clear up a bunch of small things, a bunch of X1s. And finally, the finishers. The majority of the decks only ran like 2 to 4 creatures, maybe. My deck was running 3 finishers and a couple creatures to be able to get instants and sorceries out of the yard. But I had 1 Watcher of the Mist, which was just a nice 3/4 for 5 that if you could protect it could close out a game pretty fast after you run your opponents out of resources. And super important at the time was the Cold Water Snapper. This guy, back around Christmas time, there wasn't any edicts at common. So the Cold Water Snapper was legit. If you resolved it, it was unkillable. There are some edicts in the format now, so I do recommend if you are building a Black X list to maybe put a couple of them in your maybe pile, just to be able to deal with a 4/5 hexproof for 6. Sounds super good, right? I did end up, like I said, I loved the deck a lot when I was playing around Christmas. My favorite game from that, I ended up in a mirror match, and through nothing but attrition, I had 4 cards left. My opponent, and I managed to meander it in such a way to where my opponent decked before I did. And it was grueling. It was probably 40 minutes long for a single game, and I loved every second of it. If this describes you in any way, I recommend picking up a list or brewing your own list that's similar. There are going to be links to decks that I recommend in the description box down below. If you do happen to see me while you're playing, take a screenshot of it. My username and my Twitter name are exactly the same. It is Geek Luke G. So if you see Geek Luke G across from you during this Pauper event, please screenshot it. Please send it to me. Tell me what you were playing. Tell me who you are. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching the video. If you like what you saw, consider subscribing. You can follow me on Twitter @GeekLukeG. This is Couch Troll Brewing.